Welcome to Unsolved Cases by Scoob. I'm your host, Larry Hunter, and today we're diving deep into a case that will challenge everything you think you know about human behavior, small-town secrets, and the thin line between accident and murder. This is the story of the body in the toilet, a mystery so strange, so physically impossible, that it has captivated investigators and armchair detectives for over 3 decades. Picture this. It's February 28th, 1989, in the small village of Miyakoji, nestled in what is now the Tamura district of Fukushima, Japan. Winter's grip is still fierce. Snow blankets everything in sight, and the temperature is brutal. A 23-year-old elementary school teacher returns from a long weekend visiting relatives, ready to settle back into her routine. She lives alone in a single dormitory on the school grounds, a modest space with a small, squat toilet attached. It should have been just another ordinary evening, but what she discovered when she looked down into that toilet bowl would transform her life and create one of Japan's most enduring unsolved mysteries. What she saw defied all logic, all reason, all possibility. A man's black leather shoe, sitting in her toilet bowl. But that was just the beginning of a discovery so shocking, so physically impossible, that it would haunt an entire community for decades to come. The teacher's first instinct was confusion, mixed with fear. Had someone broken into her dormitory? Was this some kind of cruel prank? Her mind raced through possibilities, but none prepared her for what she was about to uncover. You see, her toilet was a traditional squat toilet. The bowl was set directly into the ground, connected by a small U-shaped pipe to a sewage tank that was accessed and emptied from outside. Something compelled her to investigate further. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need to understand how a shoe had ended up in her toilet. She walked outside to where the sewage tank was located, and that's when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The covering of the tank was open. What happened next would echo through the village for years to come. She peered inside that tank, and what she saw made her release a scream so piercing, so filled with terror, that teachers and staff from across the dormitory grounds came running. And her scream was completely justified, because there, crammed inside that narrow sewage tank, were the legs of a human being. Not just legs, an entire man, folded and compressed into a space that seemed physically impossible for a human body to occupy. The responding teachers and the school principal quickly confirmed what everyone feared. This person was dead. The police were called immediately, but when they arrived and began trying to remove the body, they encountered a problem that would become central to this entire mystery. Here's where this case moves from tragic to truly bizarre. The police couldn't remove the body from the sewage tank. Why? Because the outer pipe connecting the toilet to the tank was only 36 centimeters wide. That's about 14 inches. To put this in perspective, according to Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, the average shoulder width for Japanese men aged 25 to 29 is 40.4 centimeters. Think about that for a moment. Even if this man had below average shoulder width, fitting through that pipe would have been an extraordinary physical feat. Yet somehow, impossibly, a fully grown man had ended up inside that tank. The body was discovered in a position that can only be described as grotesquely contorted. Arms bent at the elbows and pressed close to his torso, knees sharply folded under him in an almost fetal position. His body was partially submerged in the cold sewage water, with minor abrasions on his elbows, knees, and forearms, scratches that suggested he had struggled to move within that impossibly tight space. One shoe remained on his foot, while the other, the one the teacher had first spotted, had somehow made its way into the toilet bowl above. His clothing was wet and disheveled, and the February cold had left its mark. The visual was one of extreme constraint and suffering, a human being compressed into a space that seemed to defy the basic laws of physics and human anatomy. The question that immediately gripped investigators was simple yet profound. How did he get in there? And perhaps more importantly, who was he? The man in the sewage tank was identified as Naoyuki Kanno, a 27-year-old who was, by all accounts, the last person anyone would expect to find in such circumstances. Kanno wasn't a drifter, a criminal, or someone living on society's margins. He was a pillar of his community, energetic, reliable, and deeply connected to the people around him. Born and raised near Tamura, in Fukushima Prefecture, Kanno had grown up in the kind of tight-knit environment where everyone knew everyone. From his school days, he stood out not for trouble, but for his positive contributions. He was athletic, musical, he played in a band, and wrote his own songs, and showed a natural leadership ability that drew people to him. He worked as an MC at weddings, participated in youth association activities, and even helped the sitting village mayor with campaign efforts. After graduating from Fukushima University, Kanno had landed a stable job with a local company that supported the nearby Daiichi power plant. Yes, the same nuclear facility that would later become globally infamous after the 2011 tsunami. His work was about a 30-minute drive from his hometown, and he was building what appeared to be a solid, respectable career in an important regional industry. But it was Kanno's character that made this case so mystifying. Colleagues described him as dependable and trustworthy. Neighbors and friends knew him as approachable and kind, with a bright personality that naturally drew others to him. He lived with his parents and grandmother in the Miyakoji area, maintaining strong family ties while staying active in community events. This was not a man prone to reckless behavior or poor judgment. What makes this case even more haunting is how normal Kanno's final days appeared to be. On February 23, 1989, just 5 days before his body was discovered, he attended a farewell party for a senior friend. Nothing seemed amiss. He was social, engaged himself. He left the party early, around 1 a.m., which was typical for someone who had work the next day. The morning of February 24th was the last time anyone saw Naoyuki Kanno alive. His father watched him leave the family home around 10 a.m., heading out to run errands, a completely ordinary moment that would become the last normal interaction in this increasingly bizarre story. What happened between that moment and when his body was discovered on February 28th remains a mystery that has puzzled investigators and amateur sleuths for over 30 years. There were no signs of distress in his behavior, no indication that he was troubled or planning anything unusual. His family described him as acting completely normally, engaged with life and his surroundings in typical ways. Yet, somewhere in those missing 4 days, Naoyuki Kanno ended up in a situation so strange, so physically challenging, that it would become one of Japan's most discussed unsolved mysteries. The contrast between the man everyone knew, responsible, social, forward-thinking, and the circumstances of his death, created a cognitive dissonance that the community struggled to resolve. When authorities finally managed to extract Naoyuki Kanno's body from the sewage tank, they transported it to the local fire station for examination. The autopsy would provide crucial information, but also deepen the mystery in some unexpected ways. The medical examiner determined that Kanno had died approximately 2 days before his body was discovered, meaning he passed away on February 26, 1989. This timeline was significant because it meant he had somehow ended up in that tank 2 full days after he was last seen by his father. What had he been doing during those missing 2 days? Where had he been? These questions remain unanswered. The cause of death was listed as hypothermia, combined with a thoracic circulation disorder. In simpler terms, the extreme cold and physical constriction from being trapped in such a narrow space had caused his body to shut down. The compressed position had restricted his blood flow, while the February temperatures had steadily drained his body heat. It would have been a slow, agonizing way to die. Crucially, the autopsy found no signs of foul play. There were no defensive wounds, no indications of a struggle, no injuries suggesting another person had been involved in his death. The medical examiner officially ruled it an accidental death. However, the minor cuts and scrapes on Kanno's elbows and knees told a story of movement and struggle within that confined space, evidence that he had been conscious and trying to maneuver, perhaps to escape, while trapped inside the tank. But here's what the autopsy couldn't explain. How had he gotten into that impossible space in the first place? The police investigation concluded with a theory that shocked and outraged the local community. According to their official report, Naoyuki Kanno had voluntarily entered the sewage tank, likely to spy on the female teacher who lived in the dormitory above. In other words, they were calling him a peeping Tom, who had died in pursuit of voyeuristic activities. The authorities pointed to several pieces of evidence to support this theory. The scratches on his elbows and knees suggested he had crawled through the pipe voluntarily. His body position, with his head toward the toilet bowl, seemed consistent with someone trying to look up. And the absence of defensive wounds indicated no struggle with another person. But this explanation was met with immediate and fierce resistance from the community. The reaction was so strong that over 4,000 villagers signed a petition demanding that police reopen the case and conduct a full murder investigation. Think about that. In a small community, where everyone knew everyone, 4,000 people were willing to publicly challenge the police findings because they simply could not reconcile the official theory with the man they knew Naoyuki Kanno to be. The community's objections were both practical and personal. Practically, the physical challenges were enormous. Crawling through a 36-centimeter pipe in freezing temperatures into sewage water and somehow positioning oneself to spy through a toilet bowl seemed not just unlikely, but nearly impossible. Personally, those who knew Kanno described the theory as completely inconsistent with his character. This was a respected, social, responsible man with no history of inappropriate behavior. As the official explanation crumbled under community scrutiny, alternative theories began to emerge. One of the most persistent involved a possible romantic connection between Kanno and the teacher whose dormitory he was found beneath. Some locals speculated that Kanno and the teacher had been involved in a relationship, or that he had feelings for her that weren't reciprocated. Others suggested a more complex love triangle, possibly involving the teacher's boyfriend. In these scenarios, Kanno's presence at the dormitory might have been related to a romantic confrontation or dispute that had gone terribly wrong. The timing seemed to support some version of this theory. The teacher had been away visiting relatives from February 24th to 28th, the exact period when Kanno went missing. Had he known about her travel plans? Was he waiting for her return? Or was there some other reason his death coincided with her absence? Another variation of this theory suggested that Kanno might have been trying to help the teacher with some problem. Perhaps someone was harassing her, and he had gotten involved in a way that led to his death. This would explain his presence at the dormitory while maintaining his reputation as a good, helpful person, rather than a voyeur. However, like all theories in this case, the romantic connection remained speculative. There was no concrete evidence of a relationship between Kanno and the teacher, and the physical mystery of how he ended up in that tank remained unexplained, regardless of his motivations for being there. Here's where this story takes a potentially darker turn. Remember that Naoyuki Kanno worked for a company supporting the Daiichi nuclear power plant. In the context of 1980s Japan, nuclear energy was both economically vital and politically sensitive. Workers at these facilities sometimes became aware of safety issues, environmental concerns, or other sensitive information that certain parties might prefer to keep quiet. What makes this theory particularly intriguing is a detail that seems too coincidental to ignore. Another colleague, who had previously investigated the Fukushima plant, died just 1 month before Kanno. The close timing of these two deaths raised suspicions among some locals that they might have been targeted due to their work or what they knew about plant operations. Could Kanno have uncovered information about safety violations, environmental damage, or corruption related to the nuclear facility. Was his death connected to attempts to silence him? The theory gained traction in online discussions and among locals concerned about potential cover-ups or clandestine activities. While there's no direct evidence linking Kanno's death to his work at the nuclear facility, the connection adds another layer of complexity to an already mysterious case. It also provides a potential motive for foul play that goes beyond personal relationships or random crime. The high-stakes world of nuclear energy, where the wrong information in the wrong hands could cost companies millions or expose dangerous practices. The nuclear connection theory transforms Kanno from a victim of accident or personal dispute into a potential whistleblower whose death might have been orchestrated to protect powerful interests. Despite the official ruling of accidental death, many observers remained convinced that someone else was involved in Naoyuki Kanno's death. The foul play theory was supported by several suspicious details that the official investigation seemed to overlook or dismiss. First, there was the question of Kanno's car, which was found unlocked with the keys inside. This suggested he had planned to return quickly, not exactly consistent with someone planning to spend time hiding in a sewage tank. Second, one of his shoes was found far from the tank, raising questions about how it could have traveled such a distance if he had entered the tank voluntarily. The physical impossibility of the situation also supported foul play theories. Even if Kanno had somehow squeezed through the 36-centimeter pipe, the idea that he did so voluntarily in freezing temperatures seemed absurd to many proponents of foul play, suggested that he might have been killed elsewhere and his body somehow forced into the tank to hide evidence, though this raised its own questions about how such a feat could be accomplished. Some variations of the foul play theory connected back to the romantic theories. Perhaps a confrontation with the teacher's boyfriend had turned violent, and the sewage tank was chosen as a way to make the death look accidental, or to implicate Kanno as a voyeur, thereby discrediting him posthumously. Kanno's family even conducted their own investigation, physically testing the sewage pipe to see if voluntary entry was possible. Their conclusion was that it would have been nearly impossible for him to enter the tank on his own, strengthening their belief that someone else was involved in his death. Another theory that emerged suggested that Kanno might have suffered some kind of psychological episode or breakdown that led to his bizarre behavior, mental health issues, sudden panic, substance use, or a moment of severe disorientation might have caused him to make decisions that were completely out of character. This theory attempted to bridge the gap between the physical evidence and Kanno's known personality. Perhaps something had happened during those missing 2 days that had triggered a psychological crisis. Maybe he was fleeing from something or someone and saw the sewage tank as a hiding place. Maybe he was confused, disoriented, or not thinking clearly due to stress, illness, or substance use. However, this theory faced significant challenges. Kanno's friends and family consistently described him as mentally stable, calm, and responsible. There were no reports of erratic behavior, depression, anxiety, or substance abuse issues. His actions in the days leading up to his disappearance seemed completely normal, showing no signs of psychological distress. Moreover, even if Kanno had been in some kind of altered mental state, the physical challenges of entering the sewage tank remained enormous. The combination of the narrow pipe, freezing temperatures, and sewage water would have been dangerous and uncomfortable for anyone, regardless of their mental state. The psychological breakdown theory, while possible, struggled to account for both the physical evidence and the testimony of those who knew Kanno best. Some investigators focused on the environmental and situational factors that might have contributed to Kanno's death, regardless of his initial motivation for being at the dormitory. February 1989 was brutally cold in Fukushima, with thick snow covering the ground and temperatures well below freezing. And this theory suggested that Kanno might have entered the area around the dormitory for any number of reasons. Perhaps to meet someone, perhaps seeking shelter, perhaps investigating something suspicious. Once there, A combination of curiosity, poor judgment, and environmental pressures could have led him to enter the tank. Maybe he was trying to retrieve something that had fallen in. Maybe he was investigating strange noises or signs of trouble. Maybe he was trying to fix a problem with the sewage system. Once inside the narrow pipe, the extreme cold would have quickly sapped his strength, making escape nearly impossible. The environmental theory emphasized how quickly hypothermia can impair judgment and physical capability. In freezing temperatures, what might start as a brief investigation or repair attempt could quickly become a life-or-death situation. The cramped space would have prevented proper blood circulation, accelerating the onset of hypothermia, and making escape increasingly unlikely. This theory had the advantage of not requiring either criminal behavior from Kanno or foul play from others, while still acknowledging the physical challenges that made his death so mysterious. The Naoyuki Kanno case didn't just puzzle investigators, it tore apart the small community of Miyakoji. The official conclusion that he was a voyeur who died while spying on a female teacher was seen by many residents as not just wrong, but deeply insulting to Kanno's memory and his family. The community response was unprecedented. Over 4,000 villagers signed a petition demanding that police reopen the case and conduct a full murder investigation. In a small town where everyone knew everyone, this represented an extraordinary level of public disagreement with official findings. It wasn't just about one man's death. It was about trust, justice, and the community's right to have their concerns taken seriously. The case gained national attention throughout Japan, partly because of its bizarre and almost surreal nature, but also because it raised broader questions about rural safety, police investigative methods, and the treatment of unsolved mysteries. Media coverage focused on the impossible physics of the situation and the community's rejection of official explanations. For the school and its staff, the case created lasting security and safety concerns. If Kanno's death was truly accidental voyeurism, it highlighted vulnerabilities in dormitory design and safety protocols. If it was foul play, it meant a killer had never been caught. Either way, the teachers living in similar dormitories felt less safe. The case also became a touchstone for discussions about how small communities handle tragedy and mystery. The solidarity shown by the villagers in challenging official findings demonstrated the power of community bonds, but also highlighted the tensions that can arise when local knowledge conflicts with official investigations. By 2004, 15 years after Naoyuki Kanno's death, Japanese authorities made a decision that frustrated everyone seeking answers. They officially closed the case. The statute of limitations on murder had expired, making further criminal investigation legally pointless, even if new evidence emerged. This closure was met with widespread frustration and disbelief, not just from Kanno's family, but from the thousands of community members who had never accepted the official explanation. The case was sealed with the same accident ruling that had been controversial from the beginning, leaving all the physical impossibilities and unanswered questions unresolved. The closure meant that even if someone came forward with new information, even if evidence emerged pointing to foul play, there could be no criminal prosecution. It was a legal end to a case that had never found a satisfactory resolution. For many observers, it felt like the authorities were simply tired of dealing with a mystery they couldn't solve, and decided to make it officially go away. Kanno's family continued to maintain their belief that the official explanation was wrong. They had never accepted that their son, brother, and community member was a voyeur, and they had never been convinced that he could have voluntarily entered that sewage tank. But with the case officially closed, their options for pursuing justice or alternative explanations became extremely limited. The closure also meant that the many theories that had emerged over the years would remain just that, theories. Without official investigation, without access to evidence, without the possibility of legal resolution, the case was frozen in a state of permanent uncertainty. More than 30 years after Naoyuki Kanno's body was found in that impossible place, the case remains Japan's most haunting unsolved mystery. Physical impossibility, small-town secrets, explanations that don't add up, and a victim whose life seems at odds with his death. New theories still surface, evidence is re-examined, and amateur investigators refuse to let the questions die. How did a man with broad shoulders fit through a 36-centimeter pipe? Who would place a body where it could not plausibly be placed? There's a detail late in the investigation that changes everything, and it hasn't been widely discussed. Hear the full twist and the overlooked evidence. Download the Scoob app now to get access to the full story and exclusive bonus material. Thanks for listening. Keep questioning and tune in next time.